Welcome to the first Earthbound live video conversation. This is a video conversation in um, in support of my forthcoming book, but it's about the idea of terraphilia. And for those who don't know me, good morning, Beth. I'm Susan Tweit. I'm a botanist and writer, and the creator of Cultivating Terraphilia on Substack. I am a believer that we all need to be connected to our home in nature. And the idea of terraphilia, good morning, Tootie, is that we humans are inextricably and internally at the cellular level connected to this living earth and all the other beings we share it with. So we're going to talk this morning. Stephanie Raffelock and I are going to talk about what terraphilia means to her and a little bit about how we connect to nature as we should be every day in our everyday places. Good morning, Tess. Good morning, Sequoia Bennett. Lovely to have you all here. So I'm Susan Tweit. I'm your host. I should say just a tiny bit more about me, but that's it. I'm a botanist who studies how plants create the landscapes that we live in. And I'm a writer about this earth and our human connection to it. 13 books, soon to be 14. And my conversation guest today and my friend is Stephanie Raffelock, who has this kind of amazing bio. I just want to say she's done things that I wish I had done. Like she went to Naropa University for their program in writing and poetics. So she has a degree in writing and poetics from Naropa, the Buddhist University in Boulder. That's super cool. She's the author of some books with fabulous titles: Creatrix Rising, Unlocking the Power of Midlife Women, which should key you into the fact that her interest is in where we are, those of us who are older than 20-somethings in our lives. And her Substack is called Creative Eldering. She also has the book with one of the best titles I know of, a delightful little book on aging, which is just, how cool is that? How often do we think of aging as delightful? She's written and blogged for lots of publications, including the Aspen Times, which would be over the hill from where I live now, in the Rogue Valley Messenger. What I love about Stephanie is that I know her through another writing group besides Substack, Story Circle Network. What I love about her is that she is a major mystic of the earth, I would say. The other day on her Substack post, she included a photo of an oak leaf from the oak tree in her backyard with the word poet written on it to, I think, remind herself that she is a poet. So, and good morning. More people are joining: Joanna and William and Ea from Denmark. Zoom is frozen. Joanna, as far as I know, that you may want to reset it. You may want to start over again. I'm guessing that's your connection. Can everybody else hear us? Just a little, put something in the chat. Can you all hear? We've got people joining. Perfect description of Stephanie. Okay. So we're here. I think, Joanna, it's your end. You may want to quit Zoom and start all over again. Because I'm hearing that other people can hear the sound. Good morning, Jenny. Cool. Thanks for responding, you guys. All right. Let's start the conversation. And Joanna, I would try starting over again. Sorry about that. Technology isn't always a wonderful thing, can we just say? In fact, it often isn't, but here we are. Stephanie, welcome. Good morning. And tell us
Hi,
where you
thank
are
you.
first. Where are you?
I am in Austin, Texas, in my office with my dog.
Mickey's there. I like
Mickey
it.
is here.
So tell me about, when I say the word terraphilia, what does that mean to you? Does it have any meaning to you? And what does it have?
Well, being a word nerd, when you first started this Substack, I looked up terraphilia and, terra meaning earth from the Latin word, and then the Greek word philia, which has something to do with emotion and love and stuff. So what terraphilia means to me is it is my love affair with the land. It is my love affair with the earth. That's how I hold it.
First, I love that you call yourself a word nerd. I say I'm a plant nerd, but I'm also a word nerd.
Yeah.
And second, I love that, like me, you immediately go to what's the root? What does it
Right,
mean?
right.
Um, I think of it, and of course, you can tell. Good morning, Sarah. Good morning, Suze. Good morning, Judy. Good morning, Lydia. People are joining still. Yay. I think of, I don't speak Greek, so I always say terraphilia instead of terraphilia, which I realize that should be. But I think of it as Earth's love. Um,
Yeah.
so, and, and you have a habit that I just love. First, you have Mickey, so you have to take Mickey out for walks. Um, but the habit I love is that you are a walker. You get out, I think, every day. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and you walk in your neighborhood with Mickey, but you also walk. Good morning, Jenny. You also walk. You have a hike, a particular hike that you love. And I'm curious about if terraphilia is a practice that you want to practice every day. If you want to be connected to the earth in that way every day, how is it different walking around your neighborhood with Mickey and taking your hike?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the occupants of my neighborhood
Mm.
are different than the occupants of the
Mhm,
forest trails. And so
mhm,
there's that. There is something different about the feeling in the body of walking on a concrete sidewalk that is different than the
mhm,
feeling in the body of walking on uneven soil, dirt,
mhm,
rocks, those
mhm,
kinds of things. So a lot of it is a sensual experience. I'm less concerned about breathing in the neighborhood than I am with breathing in the forest.
hmm,
So, and by breathing in the forest, I don't mean just the idea of taking a breath with the lungs, but an idea of sort of drinking in, you
mhm.
know, I know what's in there are more annoyances in my neighborhood. too. My latest, annoyance in the neighborhood is that we've got these kids on electronic bikes,
Oh, electric bikes, yeah.
and I'm not a fan of electric bikes because I think it's metabolic syndrome waiting to hatch, number 1. And number 2, I just it feels like an accident waiting to happen for
Mhm,
me. So one of the things about hiking is that there is a quality of sound and a quality of silence that you don't get in a neighborhood. Now, on the other hand, not to give the neighborhood a bad rap, there is activity and there is life in a neighborhood. And
right,
there is something special about going out early in the morning and watching the neighborhood come alive.
right.
So
Waking up.
those
So
are the
I wanna pick up on a couple of things there. One is the idea of the the embodiment, the feeling of feet on pavement
Mhm.
versus feet on soil. Um, and I think that's a really interesting thing for you to bring up because I do think that we can be immersed in nature in our neighborhoods, but it's a different kind of immersion.
Yeah.
And what you said about sensual is really interesting because I think sensual in the sense of engaging all of our senses in a neighborhood, a lot of people think of being out in nature as a dangerous place. You know, you could be eaten by grizzly bears. Oh, Joanna, I'm glad that resetting worked. Thank you for letting us know, and welcome back. Um, there's a sense we have that nature is dangerous, and
Mm,
yet we humans have invented some technologies that are very dangerous, like electric bikes.
right.
There have actually been some really great articles about towns starting to limit electric bikes because they don't have you can go way too fast,
Mm,
and they are accidents waiting to happen. But isn't it interesting that in your neighborhood, there's this one thing you identified that feels perilous to you, and yet when you're out hiking, what you identified is drinking in the forest.
yes.
So that kind of flips the nature is dangerous on its head. Um, in this case, the human nature is the dangerous part,
Right,
which
right,
I think is interesting,
right.
you know? And worth exploring in a way. Um, have you ever written about that?
About the difference between neighborhood and no, but it's
Yeah.
it's a good writing prompt.
Well, it strikes me that you bring to it, because you For those who don't know, Stephanie is a lifetime learner in the really fabulous sense. Like, she took a course on the Odyssey. And how long was that course?
It
Um,
was 9 months. It was
yeah.
a pregnant amount of time
I was gonna say that's a really interesting amount of time.
to, to birth the classical arc of story and story structure. It was with that intention that I went into studying the Odyssey for a year. How I mean, written ages and ages ago, but how has this become the arc for our story structure and the classical sense?
Mhm.
And, it was a fascinating yeah, it was
Okay,
a
I'm gonna say
fascinating
in the classical male journey sense, because as people on this call have pointed out, um, the male journey is the outward one. The female journey classically is the inward one. And so the Odyssey is a very classical journey story, but it's a gendered journey story, which is kind of
well,
interesting.
yes and no, because the helpers in the Odyssey, the guides in the Odyssey are all female.
Right.
So you've got this interesting balance of yes, it is the male journey and, everything that happens to Odysseus with from the inciting incident to all of the tension and conflict that's created in him trying to get home, which is the ultimate human story, right? It's
Yes,
not
trying to
just
get
your
home.
story or
Yeah.
my story, it's the story.
Yes.
So, but what was interesting to me was that these women, these goddesses, these spirits kept showing up because he couldn't figure things out. So
Which is
it's like his inner is his animus in a date written about in a date before there was anima or animus, or
right.
his inner anima, which is the female anima.
And I think of that as almost as if Homer was writing about, to be whole, you have to have both the masculine present and the feminine, which
Right.
takes me back to neighborhood versus hike.
Ah,
Because there's this sense in which we have to be rooted in where we live, our daily lives, where we work, all that kind of stuff. But we also need to get out on the earth and walk that way too. We also need to encounter nature where there is more peace and quiet, where there is a different sensual experience of nature, where we can breathe the forest or the desert or the ocean or whatever ecosystem in. But we need the company of humans. Very few of us are set up to be islands in ourselves.
right.
You know, William Blake, no man, I think he was writing about humans, no human is an island. Um, we are all a part of the main. We are all attached to each other. And I would say that in a larger sense, we are all attached to every being on this earth, because what we think of as we is actually an ecosystem with billions of microbes
Mm,
making up this bag of skin and bones, and influencing us at the most basic level. So we are all connected in that sense. And I love this idea of thinking about, what does the walk around the neighborhood give you versus what does the hike in nature give you? Because in a sense, I think of that as the yin and yang of nature exposure of
well, I
vitamin N.
also think that in nature, the veil, that energy that is between us and what creates
Mhm.
the veil in nature feels more permeable to me.
Mm,
That sense of walking in the forest and seeing something out of the corner of your eye and turning and realizing there was nothing there
yeah.
could be described as like, fear. But oftentimes I see things in the forest that I believe live in the imaginal realm.
Mm,
Um, and it's that imaginal realm that is so interesting to me in being outside. If you've ever seen a big tree and they have that kind of like little arched place underneath where like it looks
mhm.
an animal should live, I think of those places in the trees as doorways. And
Yeah.
it's like, what comes from the doorway? And if you have studied oaks, you know that mother oaks communicate with the other trees in the forest. There's always a mother oak. I like to call them grandmother oaks because they truly are grand.
Mhm.
But that oak can sense a tree that needs nutrition, that needs water, that needs help in some way, and send that through the root system.
So, for those who don't know the biology, sorry, I'm gonna go all science geek.
Go on.
For those who don't know the biology of, it's actually all plants in,
Mm.
non-domesticated ecosystems. When we plant plants, we don't know how to do this, but in natural ecosystems, all plants communicate underground via fungal threads, threads of fungi that have little, they call them haustoria. They're like little tips with a syringe in them that pierce the root of a plant, and then they will go feet, miles through a forest, through a grassland, through a shrubland, through a desert, and they connect all the plants. And so, what Stephanie is saying that there are actually hubs, if you want to view this in the human terms, and you've got a internet, and these are the nodes. They're actually older, more experienced plants that sense the traffic on those networks and can preferentially route nutrients and water, and also the other chemicals that plants use to communicate, use to deter grazers from eating them to death, all that kind of stuff. So under that soil that you're walking on when you're out in the forest, but also under the concrete in a city, are all these incredible underground networks where plants are speaking to each other, communicating. When I went to grad school 1,000 years ago, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, if I had said plant communication, I would literally have been droned out of grad school. As it was, I was on sufferance because I'm female, but so I didn't say stuff like that. But now we do talk about plants communicating because plants do communicate with each other in these various ways that don't involve human words. But if you have smelled a rose, you are smelling the rose, sending aromatic chemicals out onto the airstream to literally talk to insects, to talk to other rose plants, to talk to other plants. The fragrances that plants exude are their vocabulary,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
always amuses me because we borrow those fragrances for our aftershaves, our
Right.
candles, our lotions, our perfumes, and so we are trailing plants' words through the air, and I always wonder, as we walk by, do the plants go, "You said what?
Well, I
About
mean,
my mother?" You know?
I love what you said because I was thinking of a metaphor as you were talking about, the root system and how the root system is it, it's everything. It's not one other plant. It's everything. And I think about the deep conversations that we need to have within ourselves and that idea of descent and going inward and going downward as much as we go outward and upward, that's, as above, so below, this wonderful balance. So to me, to my ears, it sounded like this great metaphor for
Yeah,
this deep rooted
right,
communication that
right.
is a soul language that I believe we all crave.
Yes. Yes, I think so. And I want to follow up and say there's a fabulous tree in the neighborhood that I lived in before I moved here to my little town in Western Colorado. There's a fabulous old tree. It is an elm. It's an American elm that was planted in Western Colorado and thus escaped Dutch elm disease because there weren't any other elms around to carry it. Um, and it has, as trees do at their base, they where they connect with the soil, the wood will rot and it gets those little openings. Well, someone had made a little fairy door about
Oh,
3 inches high, the
yeah.
curved wood fairy door with a little blue window painted in it, and they had placed, little fairy garden things in front of it. So
Oh,
every time I walk by this great big old elm and said hello to it, I greet the native plants I pass, the indigenous plants. They're my kin. And I say hello and I thank them for being there. And every time I walk past this big American elm and looked up, this is a 50, 60-foot tall tree in my part of the world, which is very tall because I live in the arid part of the West where trees can't get that tall. Um, I would say, good morning, Almus americana. That's its Latin name. And then good morning, American elm. And I would stoop down and say hello to the fairy door.
I love that.
And I'm sure anyone driving by was like, what is this woman doing? And I don't care.
Uh,
I just absolutely don't care. That brings me a lot of joy. So we this is we could talk forever. You know that, Stephanie.
Yes, I know.
I
And
want One of my aims in these short conversations, one is to keep them from getting too long, so people can easily watch them and rewatch them. But another is to remind us of things we can do in our everyday lives that 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 strengthen our terraphilia, that strengthen our connection to this amazingly interrelated, interactive, web together Earth. And so you told me a while ago about something you do that I just think is so charming, so amazing, and so fun. Would you tell us about your habit of collecting rocks and painting them?
yes. I'm going to
Mm.
start with COVID.
Oh, good. Okay.
In COVID, there was a phenomenon that didn't happen just here in my neighborhood, that happened all over the country. Kids were home from schools, and I began to see in my neighborhood these painted rocks, some with decorations, some with plants, and the kids would stash
Big
them.
rocks?
No,
Little
little,
ones?
just like little
Little ones?
rocks,
Okay.
little rocks. And they would stash them around the neighborhood, and you would see them during COVID. In talking with friends of mine throughout the country, this was going on during COVID, these
Hmm.
painted rocks. So I called these rocks story stones.
Ooh, I like that.
And there actually is a phrase, story stones, which I didn't know about at the time, that the Aborigines in Australia use.
Right.
When you are learning a story,
Right.
as you memorize one section, you get a little story stone. And then
Right.
when you memorize the second section, you get another
You
story
get
stone.
another story stone. Yeah.
So, thus the story stones. When my brother and my sister passed away within a year of each other, a few
Mm,
years back, I
mm,
these little rocks and I painted their names and their birth
yeah.
date and their death date, and I kept them in the garden. And then
Yeah.
sometimes I would bring them into the house and hold on to them because they just made me
Yeah.
feel like they were still here with me.
Yeah. That's a beautiful practice.
That same year, I started painting other stones for my garden. And I am not an artist in any stretch of the imagination, although my friend Beth Gaynor, who's on this call, will beg to differ. She believes
Beth
art is in everyone, and she is.
Beth's amazing. Beth is
Yes.
amazing. Yes.
So, I started painting rocks with, uplifting messages, faith, kindness, hope,
Mm,
joyfulness. And that particular Christmas, my husband and I have always had a habit in our marriage, a ritual of sorts, that on Christmas Day, the big thing for us is to do a big Christmas Day hike. So this year we went out for our hike, and at the last minute, I said, "Let's take the garden stones." So we took all these little rocks that I had painted. There were like a dozen of them, not the rocks of my brother and sister, those
right.
stayed.
Yeah.
And we went out on the trail and we stashed them in places. It's
I
in
love
a
that.
little curve of a tree next to a brook. I use non-toxic paint, by the way.
Okay.
And then we imagined on the way back, what would people think? What would they feel when they picked up a
Yeah.
stone and look? It's like, look, mommy, I found a stone that says joy. Is that because it's my name? Is that because of my
Yeah.
delight? So it became a habit. So the second year, which was this past Christmas, we did it again. And this time it was like, it was an official ritual. This is what
Yeah.
we do on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
We paint rocks with uplifting messages and we share our love, our gifts, because Christmas is about giving,
Right.
with the world and hope that people find the gifts and relate the phrase or the name to them.
To them.
Joy, heartfelt kindness, whatever it is. So that's the story of the rocks.
I love that because it reminds me that one of the things Jean Malmgren says, a beautiful ritual, and Nightlure says, I collect stray stones, whichever speaks to me. I do that too. I was the kid whose jeans pockets wore through before the jeans wore through because I was always collecting stuff. I have bowls around my house with small stones that have meaning to me. But I love this because it reminds me of what we do as children so freely, and then as adults, we learn to be more dignified and not to be public about these kinds of things, whatever prohibition we pick up as adults. Um, but it reminds me to remind people to be childlike when they're out hiking. Not in the dangerous sense, but in the sense of remember your child self before you learned not to to inhale the forest, before you learned not to feel sensual joy in being out walking around among our wild kin. It's a way of reminding people to slow down and bring that inner self out again, in this really charming way that isn't destructive. It's not like you are painting the boulders you walk by, with a heart that says Stephanie and Dean,
Right.
um, and I have actually been out backpacking in the Rockies and found where people carried spray paint and
Yeah.
painted boulders, and I'm like, okay,
Mm.
that's if you wanna do that in your
Right.
neighborhood, fine, but ask your neighbors if you can paint their boulder first. But, it's a non-destructive thing to do that encourages people to be childlike when they're out hiking, and I think that's a beautiful practice. Or even walking the neighborhood.
And, children have this very, kind of ritualized way of play that comes
Mhm,
natural. I talked about that permeable veil that you can see in
mhm.
nature, which is a little hard to see in the neighborhood. I think that kids easily pass through that veil
Oh, yeah.
when
Yeah,
they're out playing in
yeah.
nature. Everything from mud pies. Remember how good mud felt in your hands? And it's like you'd
Mhm.
never do that as an adult, but there's something special about the way soil feels in your hands.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
There's something special about when I had my knee surgery, I went and got a twig that had fallen from my oak tree, and I
Mm,
put it beside my bed because I spent a month there.
yeah.
And it's like trees are this strong. They can lose twig and they still grow strong. So,
Yes. Yes. That's a beautiful symbol. That's a great symbol. One of the things that I so appreciate about you, me, I'm botany girl. I'm so I'm just so focused on the can I feel it? Can I touch it? You know, I love that you find the metaphors and the symbols and everything. That's a really good practice for me to remember because I can do that too. I'm just so focused in the immediate physical environment. So, um, does anybody who is on the call have a question for us? I'm looking at the list of who's joined and chats. And Joanna, I hope that you're still at least hearing the video, the audio of this. I'm sorry that the connection is not working well for you. Does anybody have a question out there for Stephanie or me, or just in general? I'm seeing little hearts floating up. Love that. Susan K, hey. Cheryl, hi. Paget, hi. Kate Davis, hi. Karen Morton, all sorts of people. Um, not seeing questions.
okay.
We said this would be half an hour. Happy to hang around for a couple of minutes, and chat for a little longer. If anybody has a question, let us know. We'll give it. Stephanie, can you give it 5 more minutes?
Sure, I can give it
Give it a
5.
little time. Um, Nightler says this is a great chat.
Oh, that's
Thanks.
great to hear.
Thanks for being here. I had one more thing I wanted to follow up on, and I guess I want to pull us back to the neighborhood and say most of us live in very urban or city spaces. How, when you're walking the neighborhood, maybe with Mickey, maybe by yourself, just exercising that bionic knee, what are those moments, or in your yard, what are those moments that bring you close to the feel of being in the forest?
Well, I think walking with a dog, for starters,
Mm,
because, dogs, yes, are domesticated now, but they're really if you've ever had a puppy, you know that dogs
yeah,
are wild animals.
yeah, yeah.
So, the fact that I'm out walking in the neighborhood with a wild animal, that
Mm.
there's something that it feels natural to me about that, feels naturing to me. Um,
That's a great verb. I like that.
naturing. It's a
Naturing.
word nerds have the right to make up new words.
That's true.
That that's
That's
what I
true.
say. Um,
I'm a believer on that.
and I pay a lot of attention to the trees around here because they do cycle in a different way. In in Texas, the live oaks shed in March,
Yeah.
not in the fall. They shed in March, and it's really fast because the root system is very shallow. The topsoil here is probably no more than 8 to 10 inches, I think. Um, and so I pay attention to the trees because they tell me where I'm at in the season.
Mhm.
what's happening. And I love the sound of the rustle of wind
Mm,
in the tree.
mhm.
That is a whispering,
Yeah,
whether you're in a neighborhood or you're in nature or you're in a city park.
yeah.
There's something about closing your eyes and listening to the
Yes,
rustle of the wind through the
yes,
trees and
yes.
finding the translation. What are the
So
trees telling you?
there's another 3 tips for all of you listening about simple things we can do to re-immerse ourselves in nature that is our birthright. One is close your eyes when you're in a place that's safe outdoors. Don't do that if you don't feel safe. And just listen because we are visual animals, humans are. Um, I don't have the data in my head, but a lot more of our brain is devoted to processing visual signals than is devoted to processing either auditory or smell, taste, touch
Mm,
signals. So close your eyes, close that dominant sense, and hear what you feel. So that's one great tip that you can do anywhere that you feel safe. Another is if you have a dog, watch what the dog senses
mm,
because, as Stephanie said, naturing, your dog is reading the news with their nose
yeah.
and they are getting a whole lot more information than we are. So, watching where they pause, okay, maybe it's just the other dog pee on the fire hydrant, but still, there's a whole lot going on there that we miss. And then the third thing is in listening, listen to the sounds, really pay attention to what those sounds are and imagine what they mean. So those are 3 really good tips that you can do to immerse yourself in the world of nature where you are anywhere. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I have one last request. Can we see Mickey?
Um, I don't know.
Oh, did he go away?
No, I'm not sure where he is, if he's under my desk or
He abandoned
in here.
us. He
Yes, he
abandoned us. Oh, Jean makes a good point. Maybe smells too. Yes, Jean, smells definitely
yes.
too.
And
We're so bad at smells.
we are, and I think about walking, thank you for that, Jean, because it reminds me of walking in the woods in the autumn as opposed to in the summer. In the autumn, you get that dank smell of fallen leaves and water and must and mold and all that wonderful, you know, decay. The smell of
Mhm.
decay. You would think that doesn't smell so good, but it does when you're walking in a forest.
Well, it's life recycling itself.
It's life recycling itself.
It's the nutrients going back to the soil from which they come.
Um, Susan,
Um,
I know that we have like just a couple of minutes, but there is one thing I want to end with because it circles back to um, what terraphilia means to me, and it's a Rumi quote
oh,
that says, "There is some kiss we want with our whole lives. It is the touch of the spirit upon the body."
mm,
That to me is what nature is. It is the
it's
touch of the
touch
spirit upon the
the
body.
body. That's a beautiful, beautiful quote. And we have one more question, but before we answer that question, Beth, which I'm going to ask Stephanie in a moment, I want to say one other thing we can all do wherever we are, and that is thank the other people who have cared for the land where we live. If you don't know the indigenous people whose land you live on, you can go search for the website nativeland.ca because it comes from Canada. Look at the map and learn the names of the native people whose land you live on. I
Mm,
say every morning in my yoga practice, I thank the Ute people who have known
mm.
and loved my valley and the mesas for millennia. Um, Beth asks, how does the land inform your writing?
Ever since I was a little girl, I have my experience of God is in the land.
Mm,
And so it's not unusual for me to go outside during the months where the weather permits and
mm,
write outside because I feel grounded in the land. And
literally.
sometimes, writing can be so much in your head that you will
Hmm.
drive yourself crazy. And
Hmm.
anyone who writes has done that.
Hmm.
But going outside can like reground. It's kind of like, well, if I just ground in a little bit, and that is from the land. That is the divine that I feel in the land. So I hope that answers the question, but that's how the land informs.
That is an That's a beautiful answer, and it's a really lovely way, I think, to close this conversation. We've kind of gone from the walk your dog in the neighborhood to the essence of the sacred in the land, and that to me is why we need to practice our terraphilia.
Yeah.
That's where the sacred lives, and that's so essential to keeping our humanity in the hardest times we can ever imagine, which is now.
Yes.
So, Stephanie, thank you so much.
Thank
What a
you.
wonderful, wonderful conversation. And
This
thank you to everyone who joined us. Wow. Thanks for commenting. Thanks for questions. And next month, there will be another Earthbound live conversation. I don't have in my head, sorry, I should, what the date is, but next month is another Earthbound live conversation. There'll be once a month for the foreseeable future because this is so much fun. Thank you all. Blessings.
blessings.